business. I am sorry. I will do what I came to do. I am Caine.
He wears funny clothes. Has a nose.
In the early 1970s, Kung Fu arrived on American television, introducing audiences to the wandering Shaolin monk Kwai Chang Caine, and a world where martial arts met Western landscapes, philosophy, and adventure.
And I remember I went to see Enter the Dragon, and I came back and I said to Jerry Thorpe, have you seen this movie? And he said, no. And I said, you haven't? You got to see this movie. And I decided to make it mandatory that everybody on the crew see the movie.
Behind its serene visuals and choreographed fights lay controversies and burnouts. So, what's the behind-the-scenes story of Kung Fu that makes it as compelling as the journeys of the monk himself? Let's find out as we are about to reveal the real reason Kung Fu was cancelled, how Kung Fu became a TV legend, and why it didn't survive. Remember that moment in Pulp Fiction where Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta quietly eating in a diner, planning the next chapter of their lives? Jackson's character is explaining to his partner that he's turning away from a life of shadiness after surviving hundreds of bullets. He suddenly leans back and dreams aloud about his future. I'm just gonna walk the earth. Like Kwai Chang Caine, like the wandering monk who drifted across American television screens in the 1970s, leaving a trail of broken bullies and quiet wisdom behind him. That single pop culture reference tells you everything about the strange endurance of Kung Fu. Even decades after the final episode aired, Caine's slow, sandaled walk still lives rent-free in the cultural imagination. And no one proves that more than Quentin Tarantino, Hollywood's patron saint of cinematic nostalgia, who practically stitched the show's DNA into Kill Bill. David Carradine returned to the spotlight in that film as Bill, sporting the same drifter robes, the same flute, and the same quiet menace that made him iconic in the 1972 series. Tarantino didn't even pretend to hide the homage. Pai Mei, the white-bearded martial arts master, is essentially Master Po with attitude. Tarantino grew up on Kung Fu, absorbed it, and remixed it into his own martial arts meets Western universe. And it makes sense. When Kung Fu first aired, American audiences had never seen anything like it. A show that mixed Eastern mysticism, frontier lawlessness, and philosophical storytelling into one weekly hour of TV. It was part Western, part Zen riddle, part slow-motion fistfight. No wonder Tarantino worshipped it. No wonder it survived in memory long after its final credits. When Kung Fu premiered, martial arts were still exotic to most Americans. Bruce Lee had just begun breaking into Hollywood, and the Kung Fu craze that would soon sweep the country hadn't ignited yet. That gave Kung Fu a strange advantage. It wasn't trying to ride a trend, it created one. But the show wasn't just about kicks and punches. At its core, Kung Fu was a wandering monk western, something so odd that it probably shouldn't have worked, yet did. Each episode was a quiet meditation wrapped in a dusty frontier adventure. One minute, Caine was quoting Shaolin philosophy. The next, he was single-handedly taking down violent outlaws with open palm strikes. The contrast was irresistible. At a time when America was wrestling with cultural change, the show felt fresh, global, and surprisingly peaceful, even when bones were breaking. Audiences were drawn to the show's unique fusion. For 3 seasons, viewers followed Caine's lonely path across the Wild West, and the ratings remained strong throughout. ABC wasn't looking to cut it short. In fact, the network wanted more action, more spectacle, more everything. And that, ironically, is where the trouble began. Most fans assume Kung Fu faded because of declining viewership. But ratings didn't kill the show. David Carradine did. Not intentionally, not maliciously, He was simply falling apart. The serene monk on screen was sustained by a very bruised, very overworked actor off-screen. Carradine performed extensive fight choreography week after week, often with minimal stunt support. Over time, he collected a grim list of injuries: broken toes, fractured fingers, sprained wrists, back strain, and torn ligaments. The crew joked that he lived in a state of permanent hobble. Carradine himself later admitted he was afraid he wouldn't survive another season. And then came the creative tension. ABC wanted more brawls. Bigger brawls. Flashier brawls. Meanwhile, Carradine, along with several writers, wanted the show to slow down, breathe, and return to the philosophical roots that made it special. Carradine was spiritually invested in Caine, but physically and artistically exhausted. Eventually, he did the unthinkable. He told the network he needed to leave. ABC had two options: recast the lead, which would have destroyed the show, or end the series gracefully. To its credit, the network chose the latter. Kung Fu was one of the rare shows that ended because its star chose to walk away before he collapsed. Oddly, Carradine's departure gave Kung Fu something most shows of its era never got: closure. Instead of an abrupt cancellation, writers had time to craft a genuine finale. They wrapped up Caine's long-running search for his brother, resolved lingering character arcs, and brought emotional closure to the wandering monk's journey. It was one of the few 1970s shows that ended with intention rather than surprise. The story felt complete. The monk had walked far enough. Even though the original journey ended, Hollywood refused to let Caine walk into the sunset quietly. In 1986, Brandon Lee, Bruce Lee's son, appeared as Caine's son, marking the first passing of the torch. A year later, a short-lived attempt at modernization in Kung Fu, The Next Generation. Brandon Lee now played Caine's great-grandson. Yes, the timeline became a labyrinth. Between 1993 to 97, Carradine returned, this time as Caine's grandson. The show ran 4 seasons, but ended abruptly when the production company folded. In 2021, a new sequel show centered on a modern Chinese-American woman who trains in a Shaolin monastery and returns home to fight corruption. A bold reinterpretation rather than a direct sequel. Through all its forms, one truth remained: the world still craved the spirit of the wandering monk. Injuries and exhaustion weren't the only forces shaping the fate of Kung Fu. Behind the scenes, a deeper controversy was brewing, a controversy involving Bruce Lee. And that's where the story really gets complicated. Bruce Lee, a stolen idea, and the shadow over Kung Fu. If you've ever wondered why the conversation around Kung Fu always drifts, eventually, inevitably, toward Bruce Lee, it's because his fingerprints are all over the show, even though he never appeared in it. It's one of the great what-could-have-been sagas in Hollywood history. Bitterness, stolen ideas, racial politics, missed opportunities, and a role that should have launched Bruce Lee into superstardom years before Enter the Dragon did. The truth is messy, emotional, and debated to this day. But let's start with something simple. Bruce Lee wanted the lead role. Badly. After The Green Hornet ended, Bruce Lee wasn't just looking for a gig. He was building an empire. He had a mission: to bring authentic martial arts and Chinese philosophy into American homes. Not watered-down karate chops, not mystical stereotypes. The real thing. And Bruno, the producer, wasn't going to hand him that. Lee had to pitch it. So he did. He conceived a series called The Warrior, about a Chinese martial artist who wanders the American West, righting wrongs and teaching philosophy through movement. Sound familiar? Bruce Lee pitched the idea passionately. He wrote treatments. He told friends. He rehearsed endlessly. He believed the world was ready for a heroic Chinese protagonist, a radical idea, in 1971 Hollywood. And then nothing. Meetings stalled. Networks got nervous. And suddenly, as if by cosmic coincidence, ABC announced development of a new show, Kung Fu, a wandering martial artist, a spiritual philosophy, the American West. Bruce Lee blinked. The resemblance was uncanny, and his family, especially his widow, Linda, insisted ever since. His idea was taken, then handed to a white lady. The steel theory isn't just internet chatter. It's now widespread in academic papers, documentaries, and film histories. The argument goes like this. Lee pitched The Warrior. Hollywood loved the concept. Hollywood did not love the idea of an Asian lead, so they kept the show and removed the man who created it. Bruce Lee's family maintains this stance to this day. For them, Kung Fu is a painful reminder of the opportunities Bruce was denied, not because he lacked talent, but because Hollywood lacked courage. Supporters highlight the unmistakable parallels: a serene martial arts wanderer, clashes of East and West, stories that confront injustice, and a reflective philosophical tone deeply rooted in Chinese wisdom. It's all there, just without Bruce. Did ABC purposely sideline him? Did the show's creators borrow more from Lee than they admitted? Or was it truly a parallel idea developed independently? That brings us to the counter-argument. Herbie Pilato, a television historian and author of Kung Fu, the official guide to the original TV series, is one of the loudest defenders of Kung Fu's credited creator, Ed Spielman. Pilato says the Bruce Lee stolen idea theory is not just wrong, it's damaging. According to him, Ed Spielman had developed Kung Fu independently. He had written a version long before Lee ever pitched The Warrior. Dismissing Spielman's authorship is both historically inaccurate and deeply unfair. Ed Spielman took the accusation so seriously that he reportedly considered legal action against the Lee estate. Pilato, meanwhile, insists that the academic community has misinterpreted the timeline, exaggerating Lee's involvement while erasing Spielman's. For Spielman's supporters, the narrative is simple. Bruce Lee had a similar idea, yes, but not the same one, and he did not create the series. Case closed, at least for them. But even if Spielman created the template, that doesn't erase the next painful question. Why wasn't Bruce Lee cast? The official reason ABC turned Bruce Lee down? His English wasn't good enough. It's the kind of claim that makes modern audiences groan. Bruce Lee's English was excellent. Sure, he had an accent, but so what? Audiences loved him in The Green Hornet. And in Enter the Dragon, filmed shortly afterward, his charisma, comedic timing, and verbal intensity proved he could command a camera better than almost anyone alive. Yet in the early 1970s, Hollywood executives were terrified of putting an Asian lead on primetime American TV. They feared the audience wouldn't relate, advertisers would balk, and that United States viewers weren't ready for a heroic Chinese protagonist. So the network auditioned every Asian actor they could find: Bruce Lee, Mako, George Takei, and others. After failing to find someone they felt could carry the series, they switched tactics. If they couldn't cast a Chinese monk, they would cast someone who could play one. Enter David Carradine. White, charismatic, talented, but with no martial arts training and no Chinese heritage. He won the role just 2 weeks before filming. George Takei and the Association of Asian Pacific American Artists filed a formal complaint, but only one of their demands was met. The production hired a Chinese historical consultant, not a Chinese lead. For some in the Asian acting community, this was a devastating blow. For others, the show became a source of steady work, offering dozens of supporting roles at a time when Hollywood rarely cast Asian actors at all. Kung Fu became famous and infamous as one of the clearest examples of Hollywood's racial double standard. To this day, the Bruce Lee debate won't die. Professors cite Kung Fu as a study in systemic bias. Critics argue it's a landmark example of yellowface and cultural appropriation. Others defend it as groundbreaking, innovative, and respectful for its time. The truth is complicated. Kung Fu pushed boundaries. It also upheld stereotypes. It expanded Asian roles. And it simultaneously denied the most famous Asian actor of the 20th century the chance to lead it. The result is a strange dual legacy, a beloved cult classic, and a persistent cultural wound. Another issue that has been pointed out requires looking at the show again, and if you've ever revisited Kung Fu with modern eyes, you probably noticed something. For a show obsessed with Zen wisdom, it wasn't exactly historically enlightened. In fact, Kung Fu is one of those series where the philosophy is deep, but the accuracy is, let's say, shallow enough to wade through without getting your ankles wet. The most obvious issue: the cultural mix-ups. Chinese names popping up in the wrong order, emperors mismatched to the period, and a Shaolin temple that somehow taught Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism simultaneously, basically a spiritual buffet. Historically, actual Shaolin monks were Buddhist, full stop. But in the Kung Fu universe, the writers blended philosophies like they were throwing together a TV dinner. And then there were the Japanese elements. Things got really creative there. In one late-season episode, young Caine attends a no performance in a wealthy mandarin's house, despite the fact that Japan was still isolationist at the time and wouldn't exactly be exporting their theater troupe across borders. Another episode introduces Japanese characters who behave and dress accurately enough, but they're existing in a world where British residents supposedly married into Japan decades before the real laws allowed it. Even more puzzling, Caine casually knows what a ninja is. This in the 1970s, only 10 years after Japan opened to foreign relations. It's the 19th century equivalent of someone in 1972 casually referencing TikTok. Still, Kung Fu managed to avoid one historical blunder. It left out Koreans, and that actually checks out. Korean immigration to the United States didn't begin until the 1880s. While the drama and controversy still rages on like a drunken bull, fans have obsessed over one question for 50 years. What if Bruce Lee had starred in Kung Fu? Lee's version would have been different, faster, funnier, sharper, more physical, and probably more philosophical in a way that was uniquely his. He had a natural wit and a warrior poet charisma that could have redefined American television. But while the Bruce Lee controversy shaped Kung Fu before a single frame was filmed, what role did the Carradine family have? Let's delve into that. The Carradines turned Kung Fu into a family affair. For David Carradine, the show wasn't just a career-defining role, it was practically a family reunion with costumes, makeup, and the occasional choreographed brawl. David Carradine didn't stroll onto the set as some unknown hopeful. He came from a long theatrical bloodline and had polished his craft on Broadway before crossing paths with Hollywood. Just a year before Kung Fu, he starred in one of Martin Scorsese's early films, Boxcar Bertha, as Big Bill Shelley, a role that proved he could carry intensity without ever raising his voice. Ironically, though he would become one of television's most recognizable martial arts figures, Carradine had zero martial arts training when he got the job. What he did have was dance experience, and that was enough to convince the network. They figured if he could glide across a stage, he could glide through a fight scene. Once cast, Carradine threw himself into the discipline with near monastic devotion. From the early 70s until his death in 2009, he practiced Tai Chi and Kung Fu with a seriousness that almost rivaled his character's philosophical calm. And speaking of aesthetics, his hair became its own subplot. He started the series with a freshly shaved head, which made the flashbacks featuring his younger brother Keith especially authentic. But as the seasons rolled on, Carradine let his hair grow. By the later seasons, he had the kind of flowing locks that would make a Renaissance painting jealous. Dedicated to the role even off-screen, Carradine refused to cut his hair during the run of the series. Fans can practically date any episode based on how far his mane had progressed. Well, except for the end of the series when he shaved it all off again. A bold reset button. Carradine wasn't the only family member wandering around the Shaolin Temple. The show practically doubled as a Carradine family talent showcase. Keith Carradine, David's younger brother, appeared in flashbacks as the young Caine, making the transition surprisingly seamless since, well, genetics helped. Robert Carradine, the youngest brother, whom many know from Revenge of the Nerds, dropped in for a guest appearance in an episode titled Sonny Jim. And then there was their father, John Carradine, Hollywood royalty in his own right, who took on the recurring role of Reverend Serenity Johnson, a name that sounds like someone who sells herbal tea but also delivers sage advice. With so many Carradines drifting in and out of scenes, the production sometimes felt less like a TV show and more like an elaborate family project. This family infusion didn't just add novelty, it shaped the show's atmosphere. The Carradines brought an unmistakable chemistry with them. On screen, their shared history translated into natural rapport. Off-screen, producers quickly realized that having multiple members of an acting dynasty wasn't just convenient. It brought authenticity and unexpected warmth to a series built on stillness, discipline, and wandering wisdom. Instead of feeling like a revolving door of guest stars, the Carradine cameos made the Kung Fu world feel lived in, grounded, and, ironically enough, for a show about a nomadic monk rooted in family. But the Carradines weren't the only familiar faces connected to the series. How King Arthur's castle became a Kung Fu monastery. If you ever watched Kung Fu and thought, this temple looks oddly familiar, your brain wasn't playing tricks on you. The Shaolin Monastery, sacred training ground of Kwai Chang Caine, actually started its Hollywood life as something very different. King Arthur's castle. Yes, the legendary home of Camelot wound up moonlighting as a martial arts sanctuary. The set was originally built for the lavish 1967 musical Camelot, complete with regal stonework, sweeping staircases, and that classic Arthurian grandeur. When Kung Fu came around, the production team took one look at the expensive set gathering dust and thought, why build a new temple when we can give this one a makeover? A few architectural tweaks, new paint, some well-placed columns, and boom, Camelot became the Shaolin Temple. Oscar-nominated designers Ralph S. Hurst and Eugene Laurier led the transformation, turning a medieval fortress into a convincingly serene Chinese sanctuary. It was a little Hollywood magic, a lot of creativity, and, if we're being honest, a healthy dose of the budget says don't build another castle. This particular set was so reusable that it kept showing up long after Kung Fu. It was even repurposed again for the 1973 musical Lost Horizon, proving once more that in Hollywood, no set ever really dies. It just gets a new costume. Reusing sets wasn't laziness. It was strategy. Building massive structures like temples, castles, or entire towns wasn't cheap, even in the 1970s. So when studios struck gold with a particularly good build, they kept it around for years. A little plaster here, a new archway there, different lighting, a few props tossed in, and suddenly, the same structure could pass for a brand new world. For Kung Fu, this practice worked beautifully. The temple appeared in recurring flashbacks and quickly became one of the most recognizable visuals of the entire series. Fans didn't know its medieval secret identity, at least not until they saw Camelot and wondered why Arthur's home suddenly gave off Shaolin vibes. By the time Kung Fu wrapped in 1975, the temple set had become iconic, not just to viewers, but to location scouts, set designers, and anyone who had walked the Warner Brothers backlot. Fans of vintage TV still pointed out when they spotted in unrelated productions, the same way people shout, "Hey, that's Vasquez Rocks!" whenever Captain Kirk climbs it for the 50th time. And speaking of locations, the show didn't rely solely on studio magic. Scenes were shot across Vasquez Rocks, old Tucson studios, the Yuma Desert Dunes, seen in the opening and closing credits, and the wilderness of Malibu Creek State Park. But nothing captured the series' soul quite like that reimagined temple, Hollywood recycling at its finest. But while a set could be repainted, redressed, and reused, casting wasn't nearly so easy, and some surprising actors nearly became Kwai Chang Caine, William Smith's wild journey to the Kung Fu lead. Before David Carradine ever stepped into the quiet sandals of Kwai Chang Caine, another contender nearly snagged the role, and he couldn't have been more different. Picture this: a hulking, 6 feet and 2 inches muscle-bound biker film legend as a soft-spoken Shaolin monk. Sounds odd? Hollywood thought it might work, at least for a moment. William Smith was not just tough, he was Hollywood tough. By the time Kung Fu was being cast, he had already become a familiar face in biker movies, outlaw roles, and the kind of characters who solved problems with fists, chains, or pure intimidation. He had an arm wrestler's grip, a bodybuilder's frame, and a stare that suggested he had absolutely no problem throwing you across a bar table. But behind all that muscle was a surprisingly brilliant man. Smith spoke Russian fluently, plus German, French, and Croatian. He held a doctorate in language studies, and during the Korean War, he served in the Air Force conducting secret missions as a Russian interceptor. He even became the Air Force weightlifting champion. In short, imagine a man who could break your arm and correct your grammar. When auditions for Caine began, Smith wanted the role badly. So badly, in fact, that he filmed an 8-minute test pilot with director Jack Starrett. And because early 70s Hollywood had, let's say, very questionable ideas about representation, Smith wore prosthetic eyepieces designed to make him appear more Asian. While inappropriate by today's standards, network executives back then were impressed enough to seriously consider him. For a moment, it looked like the biker brawler turned polyglot warrior might become television's most serene kung fu monk. The network was on board, but producer Jerry Thorpe wasn't. To Thorpe, Smith was simply too physically imposing for the spiritual wanderer they were trying to portray. Caine needed a soft presence, someone who could appear vulnerable, thoughtful, and gentle even in silence. Smith looked like he could snap a locomotive in half without breaking a sweat. Thorpe summed it up. William Smith was a great fighter, but not the face of peaceful discipline. And that was the end of his journey to becoming Caine. All wasn't lost. Smith did end up on the show, appearing in the Season 2 episode, The Chalice. And in true William Smith fashion, his role involved an intense brawl with Caine, complete with Smith swinging a chain like it was an extension of his arm. If you ever wanted to see gentle monk versus human tank, this is the episode for you. Even without landing the lead, William Smith's life reads like 5 lifetimes rolled into one. A Kung Fu San Soo and American Kenpo black belt under Ed Parker, a 31-1 amateur boxing record, multiple-time world arm wrestling champion, and Air Force weightlifting title holder. Fluent in 4 languages with a doctorate to match, he served in covert Air Force missions and later rode into pop culture history as the final Marlboro Man. Not bad for a guy typecast as a biker bruiser. If Caine had been played by William Smith, Kung Fu would have been a very different show, probably with a lot more broken furniture. But fate steered him toward a memorable cameo instead, and the role remained in Carradine's quieter, leaner hands. But Smith wasn't the only major actor considered. Another martial arts icon, so who's joined the almost became Caine role? Let's find out. John Saxon, the genre-hopping action star. The producers of Kung Fu seriously considered another rising star, one with sharper cheekbones, a sharper stare, and, frankly, much sharper martial arts credentials than Carradine. His name was John Saxon, and if the role had gone his way, the entire tone of the show might have shifted. John Saxon didn't stroll into Hollywood, he was scouted there. Born Carmine Orico in Brooklyn to Italian immigrant parents, he grew up with the kind of scrappy charisma that got him noticed. At just 17, he was modeling for magazine covers, posing as everything from a brooding detective to a streetwise heartthrob. One of those covers caught the eye of famed Hollywood agent Henry Wilson, the same man who helped launch Rock Hudson and Tab Hunter. Wilson saw something in the young Brooklyn kid. Maybe it was the eyebrows, maybe the smile, maybe the fact that Saxon looked like he could charm you or deck you, depending on the lighting. Soon afterward, Saxon moved to Hollywood, changed his name to something that was inspired by a local roller hockey team, and hit the ground running. Throughout the late 50s and 60s, Saxon worked non-stop. Westerns, noir thrillers, beach movies, crime dramas. He wasn't the kind of actor who waited for the perfect role. He was the kind who took the role, nailed it, and moved on to the next set. Unlike many actors who tested for the part, Saxon actually had legit martial arts training. He studied judo and tai chi long before Hollywood thought to ask actors to do their own fight scenes. That and his ability to project calm intensity made him an early favorite. He had what producers loved: reliability, charisma, and the ability to play men who seemed perpetually one step ahead of danger. He was also physically capable, which was more than could be said for most of the actors the studio considered. In short, he had the action chops and the dramatic weight to pull off the role. No prosthetics required. Network execs liked him. Casting directors liked him. The audience probably would have liked him too. But the producers were searching for a softer presence. Someone who could disappear inside stillness. Saxon, with his sly grin and coiled spring energy, radiated danger even while standing perfectly still. That quality made him a star, but it cost him the role of Caine. Even without Kung Fu, Saxon's career flourished. He became the kind of actor fans recognized instantly, even if they weren't sure why at first. John Saxon's career reads like a guided tour through the landmarks of genre cinema. In Enter the Dragon, he lit up the screen as Roper, the charming American martial artist and gambler navigating Bruce Lee's Deadly Island tournament. Ironically, William Smith had once been offered the role. He brought gravitas to Black Christmas as the weary cop trying to save a sorority from a relentless killer, and oozed sleaze in Dario Argento's neon-soaked Tenebrae as a cunning literary agent. In A Nightmare on Elm Street, Saxon was Lieutenant Donald Thompson, the cop who faced Freddy Krueger's vengeance, even returning in Wes Craven's New Nightmare to play himself. By the end of his 50-plus year career, Saxon had racked up 200-plus film and TV credits, becoming one of those beloved, everywhere-at-once actors who always added a spark to whatever project he joined. And he really did have great teeth. Everyone mentions it. It's practically part of his filmography. Saxon's genre versatility earned him tons of fans, including one Quentin Tarantino. The two became genuine friends, bonded by their shared love of grindhouse cinema, kung fu flicks, and the kind of movies that played in sticky-floor theaters at midnight. It's not hard to imagine an alternate timeline where Tarantino cast Saxon in Kill Bill, and, honestly, it would have worked. And yet, the talent involved didn't stop there. Even legends from Star Trek and Star Wars found their way into the kung fu universe. William Shatner, when he played a sleazy sea captain in the episode A Small Beheading in 1974. His shaggy character went by the truly remarkable name Brandywine Gage. Later on in that same season, on the episode Cross Ties, a very young Harrison Ford made a surprise appearance. Though the series ended long ago, its spirit kept traveling, shaping filmmakers, inspiring actors, sparking reboots, and quietly seeding a whole generation of martial arts storytelling. Like Caine himself, Kung Fu still wanders through pop culture, appearing in unexpected places and leaving its mark on everything from action cinema to Western reinterpretations of Asian philosophy. Thank you for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. Also check out another interesting video by clicking on the video shown on your screen. See you on the other side.